Welcome to episode 153 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie. No Johnny fan tonight. He is in the process of a cross-country move. Shout out Johnny. Dalton, how are you doing this fine late Wednesday evening for a podcast for us?
I'm doing good. I could be doing better if the first 24 picks in fantasy drafts weren't all on questionable and injured reserve. So we've had better weeks and definitely better fantasy seasons to start with the way offenses have rolled out this year.
Yeah, I mean, the injuries, I think we're at a very not nice 69 touchdown passes through 2 weeks. If you look at like 3-4 years ago, that number was, I think, above 100. Maybe part of that is quarterback play. Maybe a lot of that is these too high cover two defenses that we have been seeing all over the NFL for the last 2-3 years. But yeah, it's been kind of a tough time to start the season. We're going to talk about that. We've got a lot of injuries to get to. I think there's even some that have popped up today that are not in my show notes that I think we'll just try and mention here or there as we go. Like Justin Herbert didn't practice today. Don't know if he's going to play. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later if we get to it. But first, Dalton, I thought we could actually start this show on a happy note. This is going to be a mostly pretty gloomy show. So I thought this would be a good time to bring back one of my favorite drops.
Who's that Pokemon?
So for those unfamiliar, just like Who's That Pokemon, I'm going to give Dalton a couple of hints about a player, and he's going to try and guess who it is. This will be a little bit different than when we do it in the preseason, though. I'm going to use reception perception from Matt Harmon, which, for those of you who don't know, Matt Harmon, amazing at isolating wide receiver play and telling us if they are good, even if the situation is or is not good, that he looks at the player themselves. And so the first player, I'll tell you, this is Justin Jefferson. This is his season last year, which was one of the best, if not the best, right up there with CeeDee Lamb, I think, in reception perception last year. His success rates were 77% against man, 84% against zone, 84% against press, and 71% against double. And I will actually copy those over into the rundown for you so you can look back at those here. And then now this next player, I will copy those over here too. This is a mystery player. This is through 2 weeks, so a much smaller sample size. He doesn't do the full season, but he does like 6 or 8 games when he does these usually. So 2 is a small sample size. But through 2 games, this player, 75% success rate against man, 83% success rate versus zone, 100% success rate against double teams. I think that was like 5 or 6, which for 2 games, I mean, decent amount. And then press coverage was about the same volume, 5 or 6 times, 75% success rate. So again, only 2 games, very small sample, but this player is right there with what Justin Jefferson did last year as a route runner. He is a young receiver. He is, I'll give you year 3 or younger. And he is somebody who was drafted like to be a very good fantasy receiver for your team.
So I didn't cheat because I know you said this over a couple days ago. But since then, this guy's been getting a lot of praise on Twitter. And I have a feeling he's a guy that we haven't been high on.
Oh, I don't know about that, actually.
Oh, it's not George Pickens then?
No, not George Pickens. That would have been very interesting. He has been getting praise. I'm sure Harmon will drop one of those at some point because he dropped one for Drake London last week. So not Drake London. Any other guesses for this week, though? You're in the right draft class.
Okay. Give me a division.
A
conference.
I was going to say division will really give it to you, but it's in the NFC.
Okay. It can't be Josh Downs. It can't be Adonai Mitchell.
No, AFC. Sorry, NFC. No, NFC. You're saying it's NFC.
I'm going to get this. I can't give it up.
So
was he a top 3 rounds?
Yeah, he was a top 3-round pick, and he's a guy who you probably haven't been thrilled with the production you've got from him, which is why he's on here, because he's on here as kind of a little bit of a sneaky buy low for a guy who was drafted very highly, has not produced the raw numbers, but just like isolate the player, he's been really, really good this year.
Christian Watson.
Oh, so close. I thought you were going to have it there and you said the first part of it. Chris Olave is the answer to this question. The biggest difference for Chris Olave this year, which is just exciting. I mean, we saw what the Saints just did to the Cowboys the other day. He has run only 2 games, but he has run 47% of his routes as a slant or a dig. And if you remember back to our preseason conversation, he was getting none of those looks last year. And week 1, he only had like 1 catch, 2 fantasy points, and half-point scoring. They didn't need him. And then week 2, he had a good game. It was like 6 for 80 or something like that, or 4 for 80 or 4 for, I don't know, but it was like an 11-point day. But I mean, Rashid Shaheed, again, catches a long touchdown. Kamara scores 3 touchdowns. Chris Olave goes down the 1-yard line on an excellent catch. So, like, he was good last week, but the improvements of this offense, now will they keep this up? Probably not. But just like the things that this offense is doing from a motion perspective, we love. We were hoping this is what we were going to see. And Olave, the player, at least early on in the season, has taken a step forward. So I think he's a very interesting kind of buy, slightly low. You might not be able to get like a buy dirt cheap because he did okay last week. But I mean, he was a 3rd-round pick probably in most leagues. So, I mean, he scored 13 points in 2 weeks. So people probably are not thrilled with what he's done so far.
Well, he only has 2 targets in the second half of both the games. Both of them were obviously blowouts. They didn't need him. And like we talked about a bit last week, I think in the second half of both those games, the Saints were drawing up their most gimmicky plays, or they were getting vanilla with their playbook because they didn't need to pound some of their better plays. But Cooper has taken Derek Carr to MVP levels, which we haven't seen since Derek Carr's Raiders season with Amari Cooper, where he got injured in it, and I think
before he broke his back. Yep.
Yeah, Connor Cook came in and lost him a playoff game like 28-0 that
year. Okay, well, now that we're done talking up a good player, let's go to being very sad about a lot of good players hurt, because there are a lot of them. And I think, Dalton, probably the most relevant place for us to start as Chiefs fans is with Isaiah Pacheco, who fractured his fibia very late in that game. I mean, got bent back, just a very painful looking tackle. 6 to 8 weeks is the timeline. And now you're going to hear me reference Nate Taylor a lot, probably, in this segment. He's the Chiefs athletic beat reporter. And so far, he's been on the money. For those of you who are, watching tonight or listening Thursday or Friday, you already know this, but Keontae Ingram has been promoted to the main squad, the practice squad. Nate Taylor pretty much said that was going to happen. So I feel like he's got a pretty good pulse on the situation. He is saying it's probably going to be the full 8 weeks for Pacheco. They're probably going to take him slow. So you can probably expect a full 2 months with no Pacheco, or at least if he it may even be longer before you feel great. Like, it might be hard to use him that first week back unless you just really, really need a running back play. So that's the bummer. And the place where we have to go now is, what do we do next? Since we last talked, Kareem Hunt has signed with the Kansas City Chiefs practice squad, and Carson Steele got a decent little bit of work, even with Pacheco healthy, fumbled the ball, and then shockingly was heard from again. Now, part of that, maybe Pacheco got hurt and they needed to give somebody the ball, but it could have been Pirine. And I think Pirine played even fewer snaps in week 2 than he did in week 1. So let's start with this question, Dalton. If you're just ranking this week, I need to play somebody this week, how are you ranking this Chiefs backfield? And then we'll do the entire duration of Pacheco's injury.
So I would rank it Samaje Perine, Carson Steele, and then whoever's active on the roster.
Yeah.
The reason for that is that this Falcons defense has been sneakily good against the run. They played Saquon Barkley last week, and then the week before that, they played the Steelers. In the NFL right now, they're 12th in rush yards allowed. They've done a really good job at not allowing teams to get it, despite playing one very run-heavy team and one team with a very good running back. So they've done a good job sealing up the run. And I think the logical answer to this problem the Chiefs are facing is going to be to increase their pass rate. Over 2 weeks, the Chiefs are under a pass rate above expectation. Part of that is matchups, especially with the Bengals' interior defensive line being so poor last week.
Well,
But
and the Bengals' game plan against the Chiefs always is please God run the ball. Like,
yeah,
we don't care if you get 7 yards of carry, run the ball.
So for this week, I would take Samaje Perine. I'm also just trusting. I don't think Carson Steele is going to get targets regardless. I could see Perine getting mixed in with a few runs. So that's really it. And then the last thing I would say is I think a lot of people are in on Carson Steele because they think he's going to get the goal line work. More likely than not, I think Andy Reid's going to drop some gimmicky shit in the red zone for the Chiefs. Some weird shovel passes, some end arounds, some things that aren't going to be it.
Wanye Morris has more touchdowns than Travis Kelce this year, 1-0.
He has the same number as Sky Moore in his career.
Dylan Davola in the Instagram chat says Carson Steele is the new Peyton Hillis. And let me tell you, if that means we get Carson Steele with his pet on the cover of Madden, I am here for that. I am very much here for that.
Yes.
So for this week only, I'm going to go Carson Steele 1, Perine 2, and then I don't think Kareem Hunt's going to be active. We'll get to that in a minute. So I think it'll probably be Keontae Ingram would be 3rd. And a little part of me still kind of believes in Keontae Ingram because he was a fairly highly sought after prospect coming out of college, but he hasn't proven it in the NFL at all. I mean, I understand. Definitely, like, the concern is, yeah, he's not going to catch the ball. They could do some gimmicky stuff at the goal line, but he's been firmly the RB2 over Perine, I feel like, through these first 2 games. And if we're just looking this week, I don't know. It's just hard for me to have too much trust in Perine playing very many snaps where, I mean, is the stat line going to look pretty for Carson Steele? Probably not, because the man does not make anybody miss. He runs through them, and that's not a great recipe for anything more than like a 15 for 65 type of game if he really pops off. But he could have a 15 for 65 and 1 touchdown, 2 touchdowns, because while they could do some gimmicky stuff at the goal line, he also, with Pacheco still healthy, was trusted in a must-have-it short yardage situation too. And I said this during the game to you. I was like, I kind of want to see Steele on the next goal line carry because he's just so big and I mean, Pacheco obviously runs like a man possessed too, but so is Carson Steele, and he's just a little bit bigger and stronger than Pacheco is. So I think he's got that threat. So now, how about from now until when Pacheco comes back in, let's say, 2 months? And we also have to keep in mind, I mean, CEH is still kind of floating out there. He's on the PUP with the PTSD he has been dealing with, but he is technically eligible to be back in week 5. Now, we have no update that has given us any kind of concrete information. And I'll start on this. So I mentioned Nate Taylor earlier on the Only Weird Games podcast where they were talking about the Chiefs backfield. Nate pretty much said Carson Steele will probably be the starter on Sunday Night Football against the Atlanta Falcons. We'll see what happens week 5 while Kareem Hunt ramps up, gets in the game shape. But he kind of alluded to it. Kareem Hunt might be the starting running back at some point. And I know he had a bad year last year. I think it was 3 yards a pop, like 400 yards, didn't catch too many passes. The thing I will say, and I'm not saying he's going to for sure bounce back and be better. He's certainly not going to be anything close to what we remember last time. With him in a Chiefs uniform, he was playing most of last year with an abdominal injury, and he did have surgery on that in the offseason. So, like, we'll see. Maybe he's not even 2022 Kareem Hunt, but if he's better than 2023 Kareem Hunt that was injured, and he knows the system, he knows the offense, and he is the only one of these backs, between Perine, Steele, and Kareem Hunt, he's the one that I could see catching the ball a little bit, and I could also see being the early down guy. So I think he has the highest upside of any of these guys. And then I'd go Carson Steele, just on the off chance that he does just hold off Kareem Hunt for the early down stuff, and then P. Ryan. But with that said, this could all get blown up if all of a sudden it's like, oh, P. Ryan's getting some early down work now too. It's just like, I don't think you can really feel confidently about any way you think this backfield is going to go. I think if you need a spot start this week, either one of those guys is kind of a dart throw. And then you just kind of have to watch it play out when Kareem Hunt is in the picture. It's going to maybe be a frustrating situation that won't have the same right answer every week, probably.
Yeah, and had we done this earlier, I think both you and I probably would have said don't blow your fab or your waiver order on either of these backs. It's likely a crapshoot with both of them. I will point out, and I think I said this to you earlier, last year, Kareem Hunt was third in the NFL in rush yards over expectation lost, behind friend of the show, Rashad White, and then Jamal Williams, which is not company you want to keep with your rushing expectations. He salvaged his fantasy season, obviously, with 9 touchdowns last year.
9 touchdowns is crazy. 400 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns, which that is bad efficiency, but it does tell you this guy still kind of has it in short yardage situations too.
Now, I want you to say that about Gus Edwards.
Hey, he does. The only problem is J.K. Dobbins is a lot better.
But yeah, this is just going to be a frustrating backfield, and I think they're going to mix in all 3 of these guys, and one of them is going
and maybe CEH, and maybe CEH when he comes
maybe
back.
CEH, and one of them is going to have like a hallmark level game to really supplant this backfield and give you some idea of it. If you have people out there sending offers for any of these players, I would likely be taking a look at those offers and be considering moving on from them, because this is probably the highest some of their proverbial value will be. One of them might emerge from the room, but I think more likely than not, the Chiefs move all 3 of these guys around week to week, and you have difficulty starting them. And even then, the rushing for the Chiefs outside of Pacheco has been pretty miserable. It's not our pass blocking as much as the Kansas City Chiefs just aren't getting good looks in their run blocking game. Outside of last week against the Bengals, I don't think that we're going to be able to continue with the ball that way. And it's a lot better to give the ball to Patrick Mahomes on 3rd and 3 than trust 2 guys who you signed at the very end or beginning of this season in Kareem Hunt and Samaje Perine.
Yep. So in the passing game, since we last spoke, I think this was a Friday story. Hollywood Brown, there was hope that maybe he'd play in the Bengals game. Turns out, surprise, not healing properly, needs surgery. Had surgery, I believe, Tuesday of this week. The Adam Schefter report made it sound like a January return. Nate Taylor is still saying best case December, like mid to late December. For fantasy, though, unless you have IR spots, and if you actually have room on your IR spots after what's happened these first 2 weeks, like he's not a guy that you have to go out of your way to keep, but he is a guy that if you can keep him still, you may as well, because if we start getting some buzz that maybe he's coming back, I'm not sure you want to use him in your fantasy playoffs, but could you maybe trade that hope to somebody else? Like, I think maybe you could.
Yeah, and I see this being pretty difficult if you are down pretty hard on injuries, which I think most fantasy players are right now. You're kind of in a spot where Hollywood's going to have to be the first one cut because we know he won't be back till your fantasy playoffs. And then you're really hoping that he's back and fully healthy. And depending on how this Chiefs seasons go, they very well might hold him out until last couple of weeks of the playoffs. If they continue to roll through these games and they're 5-0, 6-0, 7-0, and so on and so forth. So it's just a concerning spot. And obviously getting him back in mid-December, you're playing kind of a crapshoot. And at that point, I would expect Xavier Worthy to have improved his standing in this offense, and it's going to make things shaky for all of the players in this passing game.
Yeah, and I do think that if he can play mid-December, I think the Chiefs will do that because they probably won't want to just throw him out there cold in the playoffs. So if they want him to be a real-life playoff factor at all, they'll probably try to bring him back. But I think the bigger story for fantasy is you hit on it. It's like, what does this do for Xavier Worthy? What does this do for Rashee Rice? Which I think short answer is he's a top 12 receiver rest of season, probably. Rashee Rice. But Xavier Worthy, it's like he's playing a lot of snaps, but he's still not getting a lot of looks, a lot of targets. It's only been a couple of games so far. Can he turn into a higher target, higher volume guy? I think they're going to need him to. Otherwise, the receiver situation is a little bit tenuous all of a sudden in Kansas City. And then like just to get this out of the way, I'm not worried about Kelsey at all. He still looks fine, looks the same. He's actually out. He's out there a lot. He's just not. So again, like I said, I was going to reference Nate Taylor a lot, but he's the one beat reporter who I listen to out of all of the teams every week. He's like, yeah, Kelsey's not running real routes like he was in January. Like they haven't really done anything yet. Now, if that's how it is for half the season, yeah, that's a problem. But I just think it's too early. And if we didn't have a 41-yard catch called back last week, we'd probably be like, 2 not ideal games. But in this tight end landscape, where only 3 tight ends have caught a touchdown pass inside the 10-yard line.
Are you including Trey McBride?
Yeah.
So he's the one that got the fumble recovery for a touchdown.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't think that stat included Trey McBride. But yeah, he did recover a fumble for his touchdown. But yeah, so like in this tight end landscape, it's like, I get being worried about him against where you drafted him, ADP, but it's like, I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, well, just to kind of highlight that, coming out of week 3 last year, Kelsey had almost an identical stat line, but he had a touchdown as well. So
yeah,
we're just as bad of a start as we had last year in 2 games, because one game he did miss to start the season last year. And I mean, the days get better. He was also a yard away from a touchdown in the Bengals game.
Yeah, and Mahomes also said there was a play where like his read was Kelsey and he looked that way, and the defense like sprinted over to him, so he didn't throw it. So like he's still getting those looks in the end zone. The touchdowns will come.
Yeah.
Okay. We do have a couple questions in the chat that we can get to real quick. First one from Sober Money. In a dynasty league, in a weird spot, and this is a PPR Superflex and tight end premium league. He has Patrick Mahomes, Tua, Derek Carr, Tony Pollard, Javonte Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Stephon Diggs, Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, George Pickens, Hawkinson, and Hunter Henry. Should he be looking to sell off his older guys? He has all of his picks, but I think what he said is he was last. But last year as well, I was last in my league.
It's a tough spot to be in, especially in Superflex. You've lost Tua, but Derek Carr is kind of doing his thing. It depends on what you can get for your old guys, and really your team is pretty young. I mean, Hawkinson, Henry, Diggs, and Evans are probably the oldest, and when it comes to tight end, they age like fine wine for the most part when it comes to playing the position. So I might look to sell Hunter Henry off this big game if you have the opportunity. If you're looking,
last week he was last in his league. He said,
okay. But no, I think that's a pretty solid team for PPR. If anything, I might see if I can get off Javonte Williams. I think that the Denver situation is pretty unideal in the running back usage landscape, and see if you can't get a stronger wide receiver 2 for your roster.
Well, he's in tight end premium, and without knowing exactly what the premium part of that is, I will say 1.5. So without Hawkinson, that's obviously tough. Henry had a good game this week, but I think I would just say give this more time. Like Mahomes has not had a good fantasy start. Carr obviously has. Maybe he'll keep it up. Maybe he won't. But like, I don't know. I'm feeling, and I think like Ayuk is another guy who he's had a slow start, and he is set up. We'll talk about it in just a minute. Actually, he is set up to have a very big role these next couple of weeks with no Debo, and he has Mike Gesicki, who just had 1,000 yards on the Chiefs.
Yeah, I would honestly hold. There's no point in selling this early. Your picks become way better later in the season, especially when some of these running backs and wide receivers in college start getting that Twitter hype, that people get more interested, and you know where your pick's going to be at a lot better if you're looking to sell or buy any of those. So I would hold. And I mean, even if you're 0-2, it's really easy to turn that around in a dynasty league where a lot of rosters are short and you go pretty deep talent-wise.
Yeah, and part of it too just depends on the landscape of your league. Like if there are not that many buyers, maybe you don't want to wait quite as long. But if there are multiple teams in your league that are set up to be able to make a buy kind of trade, you can probably drum up the bidding a little bit by waiting. And, if other guys kind of start flying off the market, if you're kind of one of the last 1 or 2 people standing on the trade market, if it comes to that, I'm also not sure that it will. I think this team has high potential for a turnaround. Real quick, another dynasty question. Would you trade B-Rob and Najee Harris for Kyron Williams and Keon Coleman in dynasty? Quick answer, yes, I would.
Oh, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't for Kyron Williams and Keon Coleman? You wouldn't trade Brian Robinson and Najee Harris?
No, I mean, I've liked the way Brian Robinson has looked so far. He's gotten a good amount of the carries, and your RB2 would be Hubbard until Jonathan Brooks comes back. That's scarier.
Jonathan Brooks is your savior, Dalton. What do you mean?
Yeah, when he comes back. But no, I would stay deeper at the position in a dynasty, and I'm just worried about the Rams in general. I am
worried about the Rams for sure.
We'll talk about this later, but they're actually out of IR spots. They can't put any more players on IR. They have so many starting players on IR.
I guess I would say if you are trying to win this year, I'm a little more hesitant. If this is like you're kind of a middling team, or maybe you make the playoffs, or if you're like if you're trying to not make the playoffs, I like it because I like the long-term investment in Keon Coleman.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of the 49ers, like we said earlier, Deebo Samuel, he is out with a calf strain for a few weeks. And I mean, he finished the game. I thought we never had like a clear injury, and then it just kind of hit us like a train. Deebo Samuel out for a couple of weeks. And I mean, this has got to be Brandon Ayuk time. It's a real bummer for a lot of reasons that Ricky Pearsall is not able to play. If he were, this would be like, oh man, like Ricky Pearsall could really be a factor this year. Ayuk has kind of had a sneaky bad start to the season. He's like 96th in yards per route run. His separation score is pretty tough through 2 weeks, but you'd assume he'll get back in game shape, be a bigger part of the game plan, and still believe in him a ton as a player. So Ayuk should have a big couple of weeks. George Kittle stock obviously up. And then like, if you're desperate, which there are probably people that are, you could do worse than Jawan Jennings as a desperate flex on any given week.
Yeah. I think for me with this, it's like a minor improvement for Brandon Ayuk, but in splits without the two, George Kittle has been a dog when when Deebo Samuel hasn't played. So without Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk averages 1.08 more PPR points. He goes from 13.99 to 1507. George Kittle with Deebo Samuel averages 11.7. Without, he averages 19.5. Like, and it's a 6-game sample size. Like, it's small, so there's definitely things that
and you know with with Kittle, it's like 2 or 3 of those are blow up games, and that's part of why it's such a dramatic split. But those matter, obviously.
Yeah. So I mean, it's obviously going to be good for Brandon Ayuk because he's going to get more looks. But George Kittle has just benefited without Deebo Samuel, and I mean, gotta say, I'm a little worried about Brock Purdy investment at this point. We were pretty high on him coming into the season compared to the market, but he has not looked the greatest.
Yeah, and having both McCaffrey and now Deebo on ice for at least a couple of weeks, it sounds like probably with Deebo, McCaffrey, probably longer. And man, I just want to give a big F you to Kyle Shanahan. Like, at least the Eagles told us on Friday that A.J. Brown was hurt. He gets ruled out. Jordan Mason clearly knew on Friday he was starting. And, I know they don't care about fantasy, but man, it just freaking sucks to have all of these people who probably cannot make a roster move to start Jordan Mason or somebody else on that Monday night game. And by the way, Jordan Mason, I mean, he's just locked and loaded as an RB1 as long as McCaffrey's out, I think.
Yeah, no, I think he definitely is. He has like the 3rd most rushing yards in the NFL at this point, and he's been killing it. He doesn't have that receiving upside and some of the funny looks we get with McCaffrey, but from a rushing standpoint, he's been all they could have asked for.
Yeah, well, and they've been given Deebo. Like, Deebo is the RB2, and so now he's gone too. So it's like there's going to be rookies probably getting carries behind Jordan Mason. So he, especially if they have a game or two where they kind of win going away, which they may in these next 3, 4, 5 weeks, he's probably going to have some games with like 25 carries. He just had 20 the other day. Like he could have a 25 to 30 carry game, and it's like, good Lord.
Yeah.
this is crazy.
Without Elijah Mitchell, they have run hot on not having injuries lately, but this season has been terrible to them and so many managers.
Yeah, another question. A lot of questions in here tonight. Cole Good. I have Laporta. Should I try to trade him or hold for now? I'm gonna take this as a redraft question. I think you have to hold because you made such an investment if you drafted him, probably like what, a round 3, round 4 pick to draft Sam Laporta in a standard 12-team league. I never really bought into him living up to that price, but he's going to have much. He will still probably be a top 3 to 4 tight end by season's end. He'll be just fine by that standard of looking at things. And you know what? Week 1, it was Jamison Williams. Week 2, it was Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, there are going to be weeks where Sam Laporta puts up big numbers. And maybe at that point you think about, okay, do I want to sell high? Like, that's a different conversation. I just think right now, if you're selling at a, hopefully, but I think a fairly low point of the value for Sam Laporta, barring injuries, of course.
Yeah, and this was always in his profile. He ran hot on touchdowns last year, but he didn't
Yep.
clear 1,000 yards. And the emergence of Jamison Williams as a legitimate receiving option in this offense has definitely taken away a lot of where Laporta was getting his work. I wouldn't be expecting a tight end one like repeat for Sam Laporta this year. They've definitely changed a bit of their offensive philosophy with the way Jamison Williams is playing. But selling him now, you're just not going to get a lot unless there's a real Laporta believer in your league. I would wait for one of those boom games where he pulls down 1 or 2 touchdowns and then sell him high. But I wouldn't be expecting like top 8 or top 6 probably tight end performances out of him from a weekly basis.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Like, the Lions themselves have not played good games offensively in either of their 2 games. So that's the other thing, too. It's like, yeah, he hasn't produced, but also the offense has just not been good. And while I don't want to say I think Jared Goff is amazing, I do think better days are ahead for Jared Goff and just for this off. Like, there have been big fantasy days in this offense, but this offense has not been good, has not been what it should be through 2 weeks. And I think we'll see better days ahead for the offense. And as a result, probably better days ahead for Laporta. He did ask, he's in a 10-team league. Dak, Puka. There's a lot of Smiths. I don't know which Smith this is.
I'm assuming
Bijan,
Devonta.
I would probably Devonta Smith, Bijan, James Cook, Kamara. And I mean, yeah, I would think that's a championship contending roster. I know it's 10 teams, so the rosters are a little bit more stacked. But I mean, the Bills are been like the run heaviest team through 2 weeks. They were for the last half of last season. Feeling great about the James Cook call. Obviously, no Puka for a little bit. That's a bummer. But like, there's a lot of guys to like on that team. Rest of season, running back Josh Jacobs or Kyron Williams. I'm going Josh Jacobs, not thinking too hard about that one.
Yeah, I'm going Josh Jacobs. He's alpha in the backfield, and their team hasn't fallen apart at the hinges in 2 weeks.
Yep, and we'll get to that here in a minute. AJ Brown, I mentioned it earlier, hamstring injury. It sounds like maybe a couple weeks with no AJ Brown. But Dalton, this is kind of one of those situations where obviously it's always a bummer when anybody gets hurt. It's a bummer when the stars get hurt. It's really a bummer in a situation like this where it's like, yeah, it's taking Devonta Smith from top 20 to like top 15. That's cool. Maybe Dallas Goedert, although he didn't do anything with it last week. But there's not a clear next guy at receiver where it's like, okay, now I can start that guy. I mean, like Jahan Dotson, we learned that you can't play him. You have to either drop him or just put him on ice until you see at least one involved game, if not 2. And then by then, I mean, AJ Brown, I will say the Eagles have a week 5 bye, so it wouldn't be crazy if we don't see AJ Brown until week 6. But I mean, this guy, Britton Covey, had 6 for 23, a lot of bubble screens. Like, he's ahead of Johnny Wilson right now and Jahan Dotson, kind of, maybe. I just like, I don't know. It's a sucky situation with really no answers behind the guys we already know.
Yeah, well, I think the real winner here is Saquon. They showed in the first game they were suddenly willing to throw to running backs. Obviously, he had the wheel route touchdown.
He also should catch the ball in the last 2 minutes of games.
Yes. But they're willing to throw to running backs now, and he is their second best option in that receiving game. Dallas Goedert lost out a lot of targets to Grant Calcaterra, which didn't expect that one to happen. Devonta Smith is, I think, the clear winner in all of this. I'm not digging Jalen Hurts yet because on Sunday night he opened up that run game that we
He
were
looked
kind of
he looked
expecting.
he looked good running the ball,
Yeah.
especially downhill. If he can get downhill, he's good. The stuff that stretches to the edge, I would like to see less of that.
Yeah. But when it comes down to like Britton Smith, Jahan Dotson, Johnny Wilson, I mean, I wouldn't roster any of them. Britton Covey led the team in routes behind Devonta Smith. Jahan Dotson was a 0. Johnny Wilson is a rookie with low draft pedigree. Like none of these guys are really there. And Anais Smith.
I was gonna say it's too bad that Anais Smith. I know he had a bad camp and like barely made the team. Maybe he wouldn't have even made the team if he didn't get hurt and was able to be put on IR. But as far as a yak guy, not that he can do hardly anything AJ Brown can do, but like you can at least have him be a big-bodied guy who you can throw to in the short game and maybe create some yards for you. That would have been at least interesting to see if we could get him on the field and see what happen with that. But yeah, it's just like don't feel good about anybody. And I'm not downgrading Hurts, but it does at least take some air out of the sails of this passing offense. But
yes,
Hurts can make up with that running the ball. Tush push worked every time, so maybe it still works quite a bit of the time with the Eagles this year. Another absolute bummer was Tua started the week off on Thursday, suffered another concussion. I mean, obviously, Dalton, this hurts if you have Tua. I think what we care more about from a fantasy perspective is the rest of the guys left behind who we drafted very highly, who we drafted to have those big, explosive, week-winning weeks. And the Dolphins right now, according to reports, have committed to no timeline on Tua and correctly, I think, by the way, to give him time to work through the injury and hopefully an eventual return to play. So we don't know how long he'll be out, but what do you make of kind of what we're left with maybe Skylar Thompson, maybe it's Tyler Huntley starting at quarterback? I don't know.
I mean, it's pretty bad. A couple of problems here. The Dolphins have allowed the third most pressure in the NFL, so there's not a quarterback you can put back there who's going to perform adequately under that unless they're elite. Second thing is that with the loss of Tua, they went to Screen Game City, and the player who benefits from this the most, is probably still the most insulated in value, is Devon Achane. He has the most targets on this team, the most touches in total on this team at 49. If you combine the next three players, they have 48. So total touches are going to him in both the passing and run game. You look at Tyreek Hill, who is still going to give you his boom weeks, but when you look at the Skylar Thompson targets in the second half, he spread it out mostly to tight ends. He was incredibly inaccurate in that game. And then Jalen Waddle, I mean, Tyreek Hill moves to like wide receiver 2 range. Jalen Waddle moves to like wide receiver 4 with
yeah, that I if I were doing rankings, he'd be outside my top 30 this week.
Yeah. And you just can't rely on any of these players to start them weekly other than Devon Achane. You're going to start Tyreek Hill because
you can't bench Tyreek Hill because even with as bad as the situation could be, that guy can just win you a week on one play at any time, regardless of quarterback play. But do you, by chance, did you see the tweet going around with the receiver splits for Hill and Waddle with 3 full games of Skylar Thompson in 2022?
No, I did not.
So Tyreek Hill in those 3 games, 9 targets per game, 5.3 receptions, 46.3 yards per game, and 0 touchdowns, just period, 0 touchdowns. Jalen Waddle, 5.3 targets, 3.7 catches, and 37 yards per game. Also no touchdowns. So it'll probably be better than that for both those guys. But like, I don't know how you trust Waddle if that's the situation we get. And Thompson, I mean, I know the Dolphins were already down bad, but he looked rough when he came in that game the other night. And yeah, like Achane, I agree with you. You still got to play him. He's probably more like a low end, like mid to low end RB2 instead of RB1 territory. And it also partially depends on, I mean, when's Raheem Mostert coming back? He missed with the chest injury. Is he back this week? I don't think you can consider starting Raheem Mostert if he comes back, but just what does it do to Devon Achane, if anything? I mean, I kind of wonder if we're going to look back and Mostert just like does nothing this year. He did not look good in week 1 when he played. It kind of looked like the guy I remember before last year.
No, and then on the same note, Jalen Wright, their rookie, did not look good either.
Yeah.
So it's pretty. I mean, it's bad in Miami. I was already down on those players for entirely different reasons. Definitely not victory lapping to his concussion, but like for how high all the draft capital was on their big three, it's going to lead to some tough games. And especially they've lost Teron Armstead on the offensive line as well. So they're struggling to put together a startable offensive unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even with Tua, this kind of looked like the same sort of offense to me where it's like, okay, I trust them to beat bad teams. What do I really trust them to do against good teams? I think that's just kind of a still a crapshoot, even with Tua in there. So didn't love the look that we got there. Okay, Joe Mixon, we don't really know for sure on this one because the Texans aren't really going to give us any information, it doesn't seem, but he did sprain his ankle on a, I mean, I know the announcer said that's a tough call, and I understand that. This is about as obvious as a hip drop tackle is ever going to be. So if that one's not going to get called, I don't know when it's going to get correctly called, but it was a hip drop tackle, high ankle sprain, or at least ankle sprain, excuse me. Let's just say, because everyone knows, if Mixon is suited up, as long as we don't get the, he could be on a pitch count, that whole deal, like you're just playing him. If he doesn't play, we have Cam Akers, and then we have Dameon Pierce, who has not played yet. And we've even got conflicting reports on what his injury actually is. I've seen hamstring, I've seen ankle, which is a little strange. I don't know what exactly is going on. That smells a little funny to me. Maybe they're trying to trade him. I mean, I would take him on the Chiefs if they were looking to trade before the Chiefs signed Kareem Hunt. But I think as long as Mixon is out, and there is Daria Gumbawale still there, who did get all the carries in the game after Cam Akers fumbled on Monday night, I still think Cam Akers is the top guy. I will say if Pierce does play, I don't have the confidence to start any of these guys in 1 week, just sight unseen. I have to see how it plays out, I think.
Yeah, and this is a team that last year committed to Devin Singletary being an inefficient runner and just let Devin Singletary take the backfield. I would find it difficult for them to do that again with their 3 pass catching options. Out of all of them this week, if you're really picking a player, I think I'm taking Cam Akers.
Let me ask you this question, because I just looked over at a ranked sheet right now. If you had, let's say you had Cam Akers and Dameon Pierce, and you drafted Zamir White, and then so you also ended up with Alexander Madison at some point, are you starting a Raider or are you starting a Texan in this situation?
I know that the Texans play the Vikings. Who do the Raiders play?
They play Carolina.
Well, I'm starting a Raider simply because they are playing Carolina.
Would it be Zamir White or Alexander Madison?
I would probably start Alexander Madison.
I think so too. Didn't he got the goal line carry right the other day, and he was already catching the passes.
And there's a non-zero chance Andy Dalton comes out there and makes this offense halfway competent, and then and then they move the ball against the Raiders. And the Raiders are getting this hurry up, and they have to run Madison. Zamir White simply looking like an early season bust, and I'm feeling good about that. Obviously, there's a lot of games to be played, but his usage has been poor. The 20 carries a game is not there. Antonio Pierce came out yesterday and said that we will be doing that. I don't know what a better time was to do it than when you had a close game against the Los Angeles Chargers.
Mm-hmm.
So take it for what you will, but I think Zamir White's time has passed. Short, maybe.
So Chuba Hubbard or Cam Akers this week? The Panthers obviously play the Raiders, the other side of that matchup.
I would start Hubbard.
I think I would too. So that, just to give you an idea, that probably means we're putting Cam Akers outside the top 30 at the running back spot this week. So just to give people an idea for kind of where we're thinking about him this week. A guy who I do think is inside the top 30 is Zach Charbonnet, of course, courtesy of Kenneth Walker's oblique injury, which they have made it seem like they're going to be very careful with this. We don't know for sure he's not playing, but based on everything they've said, it kind of seems like he was going to miss multiple weeks. And it was not a pretty box score for Zach Charbonnet. but it was at least a productive one from a fantasy perspective because he caught 5 passes and he scored a touchdown. 19 touches, score a touchdown. We will take that every time. We just hope it's a little bit more efficient next time. He's the only running back to even touch the ball in this game for Seattle, unless you consider Laviska Shenault catching a pass a running back. I really don't know what position he's classified as at this point, but I'm kind of thinking as Charbonnet as a low-end RB2, as long as he's got the solo gig here. Is that kind of how you're feeling too?
Yeah, he got 97% of the snaps, all of the running back carries.
Oh my God.
So Kenny McIntosh is the next guy on this, who's like somebody people got excited about last offseason in preseason hype. He was a 0. I kind of expected to see a little bit of him, and we didn't. Sharp had a bad rush yards over expectation. I don't think they care. I think he knows the offense, and he's just a better player than you have in McIntosh. And most importantly is he did get the ball moving 3 or 4 yards when they needed it, which is all they really needed with the way Geno Smith has been playing. So he's like a weekly top 20 option at a minimum. He's fringe RB1 just with the usage. And you just really can't ask for something that's going to be better for your fantasy outcomes as long as Kenneth Walker's out.
You just hope for more efficiency. And I do think, the Patriots are not an easy matchup, obviously, a good defense. And they don't have great matchups. I wouldn't say they have terrible matchups, but next couple of weeks is Dolphins and Lions, which, again, I think those are they lean more towards tough matchups, but neither one of those is like, oh my God, I can't play this guy against this defense. What you hope as a Zach Charbonnet fantasy manager and what you hope for a Kenneth Walker manager that he makes it back for is week 5. They have the New York Giants in week 5. And whichever running back has the job that week, you're probably elevating them a little bit above their usual value. So, yeah, Kenneth Walker, top 20 to 24 back, I'd say.
Zach Charbonnet.
Zach Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker, when he's back, top 15 to 12 to 15 back. He looked really good in week 1 until he got hurt, which unfortunately has kind of been the Kenneth Walker story.
What I will say this week, because I just realized this, I think Charb might be in my top 12. They play the Dolphins, who've allowed the 3rd most explosive rushes in the NFL. They let Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne run all over them week 1, and then they gave James Cook a career night on Thursday Night Football.
That they did.
Now, looking at this, I think I might slot him into the top 12 on matchup, and then the amount of volume he's going to have, and then the game script against this leaderless Dolphins team at the moment. It could be a real smash spot for Charbonnet now that I'm looking at that.
Yeah, so next one, Cooper Kupp. I have written down here he lands on the IR with a high ankle sprain because that's what it looked like was going to happen. The Rams have come out and said that he probably – well, not the Rams. A reporter covering the Rams has come out and said that is probably not what's going to happen. But I do want people to realize the second part of that statement was not necessarily because – that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be back in less time. Now, it could mean that. But also you can only put a certain amount of guys on IR and reactivate them every year. And I don't know if you've noticed, the Rams have already racked up the IR spots, both tackles, I believe, before the season even started. Puka Nacua, obviously those are all guys who I think they're hoping to activate off of that. So it may be more of a numbers game than anything, but it may not be too. Either way, I think Cooper Kupp out multiple weeks, and Matthew Stafford is just left with dust at receiver and tight end at this point, Dalton.
Yeah, I mean, the Rams have 7 players on IR right now. The NFL allows 8 players to be on IR. Of those 7 players on IR, all of them are starters between defense and their offensive line and Puka Nacua. So putting Cooper Kupp on there really limits them. And part of this, I mean, you go over 8, you're going to start cutting players, and they're going to be cutting starters who have major contracts that they can't do without taking major cap hits and just losing out on a ton of value. So the Rams aren't going to put a player on IR unless they're absolutely positively sure at this point that they can't play. And likely he's going to be out for 3 to even 4 weeks on this roster and not be on IR. The more concerning part of all of this is Matthew Stafford simply does not have any help. PFF ranked the Rams offensive line 32nd in the NFL. That's because they've lost both their starting guards. This was a guard duo.
Tackles, right?
Tackles. No guards. They lost Steve Avila, who's their
they've lost at least one tackle then too. I know.
Oh, even it gets worse. Yeah, so they have Steve Avila, Kevin Dotson, Jonah Jackson, all on IR, and then Joe Nobu, their tackle. Yeah, so they have 3 offensive linemen on IR. And with that, they had the worst pressure rate in the NFL last week, and the Cardinals, who they played against in week 1, had the worst pressure rate in the NFL. So it's not going to be pretty going forward. They play a vicious rush defense in the 49ers this week.
Yeah.
Probably fearful for Matt Stafford's life at this point. And I know
I thought someone's like, can't we just give Stafford the week off? They're not winning this game. Just regroup in week 4.
I've seen people saying that the Dolphins should trade for him at this point, which
well, I've seen the Dolphins. I saw someone throw out the Raiders should trade for him.
Feel bad for the guy and how this happens to him every year. At least he got a Super Bowl. When
Yeah.
you go to the wide receiver situation there, it's equally unsatisfying. Demarcus Robinson is, I mean, you could probably put him in as a top 24 wide receiver. If
Can
you're
you?
pushing it?
I don't think so. I don't
Matt
think
Stafford is a kingmaker at wide receiver, which is the only reason I give any consideration to it.
He is, but don't you just feel like my read on this, and when I say my read, my guess on this situation is it's going to be kind of like when the Chiefs lost Tyreek Hill, when Demarcus Robinson, ironically, was still there, and like Sammy Watkins was there, Byron Pringle, where it's like, oh, Demarcus Robinson has this great game. Hell yeah, picking him up off waivers, starting him. And then the next week it's somebody else, and then somebody else, because there's nobody who you can consistently rely on. Like, there probably will be somebody who has a good game every week. It's just like good luck differentiating between Tyler Johnson, who was being used in pre-snap motion, a little bit like Cooper Kupp, Demarcus Robinson, who's probably the most proven of these first 3 guys, Jordan Whittington being the third. He's at least the most exciting to me right now because I don't know what I don't know about him as a young player. And then you still have Tutu Atwell, who had like 5 seconds last year, and he'll probably have a game or 2 this year.
Yeah, and if I'm taking bets, it's on Jordan Whittington. He led all wide receivers in the preseason in yards per route run. He had really good flashes. He was a training camp hero for this team. All of those things aren't super important in the regular season. And again, all of those things aren't super important when Matthew Stafford can't get the ball out. Colby Parkinson probably gets the biggest bump for me, their starting tight end. But even then, there's going to be a lot of ugly games for this team going forward. It's going to be, I mean, it's probably a lost season for the Los Angeles Rams already. It's bad to say that, but it's really hard to recover from these injuries, and they're going to likely start 0 for 4, 0 for 5.
Yeah. 0-2 is already tough to recover from. They're almost certainly going to be 0-3. And then, I mean, I don't know their schedule, but these guys aren't going to be back in 2 weeks. Doesn't sound like, or at this point, a week and a half. So yeah, I mean, you're probably looking at 0-4, and then who knows from there. I think from a Kyren Williams standpoint, you're probably getting more volume. You're getting way less efficiency, and you're just putting him in your lineup for right now, and you're praying he gets enough passing volume and maybe some goal line opportunities. He will get them if they get down there. They just have to get down there. You just hope that he can do enough of those things to kind of make his day. This has turned into I start him, I never watch the game, I pray to God he scores 12 points this week.
Yeah, and you hope they don't get blown out so he gets replaced by Blake Corum in the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah. I mean, I call them a bust, but he didn't have a great week 1, but what is now looking like may happen is obviously way outside of his control. And like I said, it could get to a point where he is not a guy who's a locked in every week starter. I think for right now, especially just given all of the injuries, I have a hard time believing a 12-team league has a Kyren Williams owner who can bench him. But with that said, if J.K. Dobbins is like found money for you, I know it's the Steelers. Maybe if Herbert doesn't play, I would be less inclined. But if Herbert does play against the Steelers, I think you can make a good argument for J.K. Dobbins over Kyren Williams. So that would be one example of a found money guy who I'd start over him. But for the most part, I find it hard to believe that he is a benchable player for you this week.
Yeah, Sharp would be another guy that you drafted late that I would start over him, going back to our previous conversation. But guys like Carson Steele, Deontay Foreman's popular right now. I wouldn't start them over him. Braylon Allen, you might be thinking you're smarter than the NFL and start Braylon Allen. I wouldn't do that either.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't over Raheem Mostert wouldn't do it.
No.
Jalen Wright wouldn't do it. Like
No.
they have to be a guy getting 80 plus the carries or being incredibly explosive like Dobbins for me to consider it.
Yeah, because you go even further up the ranks. I'm up at like 25 right now in Fantasy Pros. Jerome Ford. I mean, Deontay Foreman was getting a lot of work in that game. DeAndre Swift. I think we all have misgivings about Swift. With that said, they play Indianapolis this week, which has been the most exploitable rush defense, which is shocking because that is supposed to be the strength of their team as their front seven.
Well, they just put DeForest Buckner on IR.
Yep.
Big loss.
So this might be a start DeAndre Swift week. This also might be a sell off of this week for if you're a DeAndre Swift owner.
Galaxy Brain.
Start
Khalil Herbert.
I mean, if they'd ever give him the ball, I think they should give him the ball.
Yeah. It looks like we got another question in chat from Adrian. Just got offered Lamb for Kyron and Tank Dell. Yes.
Yeah.
Dynasty
right now, actually. Doesn't matter. Right now, hit accept.
I would smash it. I will say this week, the Houston Texans play a team that runs some of the most cover 3, and Tank Dell might have a good week, and you might have a little buyer's remorse. But
and Tank Dell dropped a long touchdown the other day, too. So, like, Tank Dell's not some terrible player. He's going to have big weeks, but this is CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, no, I would smash accept right now.
And we just talked about Kyron Williams for 2 minutes, how we feel pretty bad about his situation going forward. All right, Dalton, anything else before we hop out of here?
No, I think we got it all, just except the trade a minute ago. I love that.
I think this is actually a different person. Just accepted this trade a minute ago. I know most won't love this, but still want thoughts. Traded away Ramondre Stevenson for Derrick Henry. That is probably one where I feel pretty equal about both sides of that trade, with probably a little nod to Derrick Henry, because I do think the Baltimore situation will get better, and I think the Patriots situation will get worse. And I think Derrick Henry has still mostly looked like the guy he looked like last year. Like, he hasn't fallen off some cliff, and the Ravens are going to win games and get leads and be able to run the ball at some point, even with a diminished offensive line.
Yeah, and the Ramondre situation, and I own him in Dynasty, it feels like he can't keep getting away with this.
Yeah.
Where the Patriots are really fighting and being physical in these games to stay in them, where he gets a ton of participation. And both Stevenson and Gibson have really high rush yards over expectation that I don't expect to continue. And when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens, they're going to get it figured out. They are too good of a team to not figure it out. And Derrick Henry will be the benefactor of their goal line touches. And he's had 2 straight weeks of about 10 points. So he's still really consistent. And you're just waiting for those weeks where he blows up for you.
Yep. Agreed. Appreciate the sub, Adrian Meza, very much. And on that note, that is going to do it for episode 153 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Podcast. Of course, we are live on YouTube, and as you have heard in the show, we will answer your question if you ask it in YouTube or on Instagram. The YouTube is Half Point Per Podcast. The show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all of that stuff. And we'll be back next week to, please God, talk about something other than injuries.